Hello again everyone from Tokyo, Japan, and welcome back to Japan Vintage Camera. I'm coming to you now from Aoyama Park instead of Hinokicho Park. This is my second video today. I shot my first video at Hinokicho Park in my favorite spot for making videos, but while I was sitting there, I got dive bombed by some of these Japanese hornets. And it's not something that usually I see around the park there, and normally bugs of any kind don't bother me very much unless it's those big cockroaches that run around here at night. But the Japanese hornets are pretty nasty customers. In America and Europe, I've seen them called in the headlines, they're called murder hornets, and that kind of gives you an idea of the reputation they have. They're about as big as your thumb here, and the closest thing I can describe to maybe like American viewers is that they look a lot like a Mormon cricket. They have the same head, eyes, and mouth with those really big jaws. And besides being able to sting you several times in one go, their jaws are strong enough to pull off your skin. So yeah, you don't really want to mess around with those guys. When I first came here to Japan, I lived outside the city, and I used to see them flying around from time to time, and they're quite loud. They really buzz quite a bit, and I knew enough to keep my distance at the time, as they were the biggest hornets I'd ever seen. But I didn't really learn that much about them until I saw a news article or a news story on local television in Tokyo. And the news story was kind of a couple of things in one. It was a little bit of comic relief, and the second part was kind of a warning. And what the story was about was a farmer in Saitama who had been attacked by a nest of these wasps. It was kind of funny in that Saitama has kind of a bad reputation in Japan. It's kind of like, I don't know, the Mississippi of this part of the country, and the people in Saitama. Saitama tends to be the place where the really crazy news stories come from. Japan is kind of a safe place when it comes to crime and stuff like that, except if you live in Saitama. People who live in the countryside, or what they call bumpkins in Japanese, the word is dasai. And that means, like, I don't know, backwards, redneck, bumpkin, whatever. And Saitama, local people kind of, I don't know, semi-seriously call it Dasaitama. And some of you who are watching here in Japan may live in Saitama. No offense to you. Some of you may live in Mississippi. And I don't mean to offend any Mississippians here. But anyway, the story was about a Saitama farmer who had a really big wasp nest at his barn, and it was quite large, and he got this bright idea of getting rid of the hornets and then selling the wasp nest, because it was quite big and beautiful, and it would make a great decoration in a restaurant or something like that. And I don't know, being kind of the semi-literate kind of person that people assume Saitama people to be, at least people outside Saitama, he kind of got the idea from a TV show he saw as a kid, where you take smoke and put it around bees to, I guess, desensitize the bees so you can take their honey. So he tied together a bunch of branches and stuff to make smoke, and he started smoking the wasps out of the nest, only to find out that wasps are nothing like honeybees, and they immediately attacked him. And the story was one thing, but to see the results was the other. When they were interviewing him, there were only two parts of him which you could see. You could see his mouth, and you could see one eye. Every other part of him was covered with bandages. And despite the fact you could only see one eye and the movement of his mouth, the expressions he was able to make with just these two things were, I guess, I don't know, priceless is probably a good word. But yeah, his warning was quite loud and quite clear. Don't mess with the hornets. So when they were buzzing around me over there at Hinokicho Park, I thought it might be a good idea to come over here. Where one of them is bad enough, two is really bad, and if there's two, there's probably more than two, and I don't want to stay around to count how many there actually are. So here I am over at a different park without the worry of my friends, the Japanese hornets. So we'll go ahead and get started on the subject of my second video today. This is quite a rare animal here. This is a 1959 Minolta SR-1 camera. The SR-1 was produced for quite a number of years. Oh, here is a buzzing around me. I hope that's not a hornet. But anyway, it was introduced in 1959 and continued in production until 1965, and there are quite a few different variations made. This particular version is the very first version from 1959, and it's a really cool camera. The SR-1 was not actually the first SLR camera which Minolta produced. The first camera was the SR-2, and I'm not exactly sure what the issue was with the SR-2. It was produced for just a short time, and then it was kind of abandoned altogether in favor of the SR-1. The SR-1 and SR-2 are basically the same camera when it comes to overall design, but the SR-1 featured an improvement with the automatic diaphragm, at least the later versions did, and also the SR-2 had a 1/1000th maximum shutter speed, whereas the SR-1 has a 1/500th second shutter speed. The way that I know that this is the first version, it doesn't have the plate here on the front for mounting a light meter, which is kind of an ugly thing which they put on these cameras. And when they put the plate here, they had to move the SR-1 name to the other side. Another feature is this camera has like the semi-automatic aperture system, so if the lens is stopped down, and maybe you can look and you can see that the aperture blades are closed, when you wind the camera it opens the shutter blades, and when you fire the camera the aperture blades close back up. So it's a semi-automatic lens. And the last thing is the bottom cover. It looks like it has two tripod sockets here, but the other one is not a tripod socket, it's a socket for mounting a motor drive. So if you, I haven't seen the motor drive for one of these cameras. I'm not attached to one of these cameras. I have no idea how it works, but that's kind of a giveaway that this is the very first version of the SR-1 camera. And as it's a black paint version, it's incredibly hard to come by. And the black paint on this camera is really wonderful. I'm not the kind of person who often uses the word luscious, except when I describe fruit or something like that. But maybe the paint on this is luscious. It is probably the best looking black paint I've ever seen. The glossiness, the smoothness of it. I've had some black paint Leicas. I had an original black paint M3, an M4, and an M4 MOT. But this is much nicer quality than the black paint which they've ever put on a Leica rangefinder camera. It's really, really beautiful. The versions which came after this version, the first version, the second version came with the automatic aperture. This version came with the 55mm f2 lens, which was a 6-element lens, a very high quality lens. The only weakness to these lenses, and you might not be able to see it, or maybe you can, they get oil on the aperture blades, which can cause the aperture to stick or run slowly. I haven't really gone through this thing yet, so I've got to take it apart and get the oil cleaned out of it. And another interesting thing is the way it works. This is original, I guess. I'm not too familiar with the early SR-1 cameras because I don't often come across them. The later lenses had a chrome ring on the back, and this one has a black paint ring. Really cool. Anyway, let's go ahead and take a look at the features and functions and controls and how to use the Minolta SR-1. The first thing we have here on the left, on the top, is the film rewind knob with a pop-out arm, and it has a convenient roller here. We have a magnified film counter dial here, which lets you clearly see how many exposures you've taken. You have a really nice, clean design here on the pentaprism, and I really like the script of the Minolta here with a small m. It's very elegant, very simple looking. I love the style of this. These were much more attractive cameras, at least on the prism, than the later SRT cameras, which were kind of bulkier and clunkier, but then they had to fit a light meter and all that inside, and also a more complex shutter. Speaking of shutter, we have the shutter speed dial over here, and when I look at the shutter speed dial and the way it's designed, it kind of, I have to say that they probably built this camera around the chassis of Minolta 2B rangefinder camera, because there's a similar shutter mechanism. And that's not a bad idea, actually, because by the time the 2B came out, the shutter was a very well proven, rugged, and reliable design. Nikon did the same thing when they brought out their legendary F camera. They simply used the body to the earlier rangefinder, the S3 SP type camera, and converted it into an SLR. Minolta did a little bit more than that with this because this camera has a lot different stuff. A lot of the stuff you can interchange on the Nikon F to, say, S3 or SP, like shutter speed dial and film counter and all that stuff. On the SR-1, it's kind of unique to this camera. The only thing it shares with the rangefinder camera is the shutter mechanism itself. Another cool thing here is the film winding shutter charging lever. It's a solid brass, a little bit brassed here on the corners, which looks pretty cool. And it also has the shutter release button put right in the middle of, I guess, the axle for winding the shutter. And this allows you to more easily wind and unwind the shutter and keep your finger on the button. Cameras like the Nikon SLR had the shutter button located in a different location than the winder. The winder is here and the shutter button is over to the side here. And though it works quite well, it's not quite as fast or easy as this. And this is much simpler. It takes away an extra thing from the top of the camera and gives it a much cleaner and better looking appearance. On the back of the camera here we have eyepiece here. It still has the original nut here which threads in and out. There's a chrome ring here with a groove all the way around it, and this is for attaching a rubber eye cup. And if you remove this nut here, you can attach a flash adapter on the top and then screw it back on. The flash adapter will protect the top from dents and stuff so long as the camera isn't dropped from any great height. If you drop it from any higher, the flash adapter may do more damage to the top of the camera than hitting the ground. On the back here we have a reminder dial for your film speed. And this is simply a mechanical reminder. There's nothing that attaches to the inside of the camera. If you forget to set this, it doesn't make any difference. This is handy, or comes in handy, when you have more than one camera and you're using more than one kind of film. Sometimes I'm using 2 or 3 or 4 cameras at the same time, and a couple of them, or at least one of them, will have a different kind of different speed film. And I want to make sure that I know what speed film is loaded in each camera, and so I always make sure to set the dial to remind me. If I'm just shooting one camera and only one kind of film, it doesn't matter what I do with it. But if you're like me and you like to shoot a lot of cameras, it's a very convenient feature. On the bottom of the camera here, we have, once again, this is the socket for attaching the motor drive attachment, which was designed for the SR-2, but which I've never seen in real life. The standard 1/4-inch tripod socket, and over here we have the release, which allows you to release the winding mechanism so you can rewind the film. On the front here we have the release button, which you depress to remove the lens, and very similar to like the all SR cameras, SRT series, SR number series. Use this same system. To mount the lens, you simply line up the red dot on the lens body to the red dot on the top of the camera and turn it clockwise. There's no depth of field preview on this camera because when the camera is not wound up, it's pretty much going to be set at the aperture, and I guess you can say it has a automatic depth of field preview, and you have to disengage it by winding and charging the shutter. The lens on this camera is very highly regarded, the 55mm f2 6-element lens. And an interesting thing about this camera, the later version with the SR-1, the one with the meter bracket on the front, if you use the later lenses on it, you have automatic aperture operation, but on this particular version here you do not. Another interesting feature is the LV system, and we have a series of LV numbers on the shutter speed dial as well as the aperture dial. And this is for using a light meter with a LV setting on it. We have an LV range from 0 to 9 on the shutter dial and from 2 to 9 on the aperturing. And what you can do is if you're you choose a shutter speed and it gives you a light value number on the side. If you look at your light meter, you would just use the recommended aperture setting for that light value, or you can do it the opposite way and use the aperture system, and this kind of gives you either say an aperture priority or shutter priority system, though of course none of it's automatic, but a pretty good system. This was I guess high tech back in the late 1950s. And yeah, but overall, a really good camera. It's very attractive. The shutter has the smoothness and such of the earlier rangefinder camera. It's a little bit harder to turn because it needs a little bit of extra tension to operate the mirror mechanism. The viewfinder in this is quite nice. One problem you do have with these old Minolta cameras is deterioration of the prism. They get kind of a fungusy kind of stuff which grows into the reflective surfaces on the prism. And you can replace it with like a donor prism from a parts camera or something like that. This camera has it, but it's not so bad. If I'm looking at a distance and looking into the viewfinder, I can see it. And it looks like a bug has been crawling around and leaving a trail behind it. But if I hold it up to my eye and look through it, I can't really see the marks in the prism. I just see what is being shown on the focusing screen. So marks like that on the prism or some deterioration isn't a big deal. And it's not as big a deal on the Minolta cameras as it is like on, say, the Olympus OM. The deterioration on the old OM1 or M1 cameras on those can be quite terrible and enough to make it very difficult to, or at least a little difficult to use the viewfinder properly. I'm kind of up in the air as to whether I will replace this or not. This camera, it has some value because it is quite a rare camera. It's only the second one which I've ever seen, and judging by the amount of cameras which I've seen for sale here and which I've come across personally, I'd say that the Black Paint SR-1, the first version, is about as uncommon as the Black Paint SR-2. And honestly, I've seen more of the SR-2s than I have the first version SR-1. So pretty neat camera. I'm kind of up in the air as to whether I'm going to sell this camera or not. I don't normally collect a lot of cameras, but as a collectible piece, this one fits somewhere at the top of the list. It's certainly not going to go down in value. So anyway, so that's it for my video about the Minolta SR-1 SLR camera. If you have any questions about the camera, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. I know in my last video I said that when I was doing, I guess it's been a long time since my last video, that I was going to make more videos in the near future, but it's always something. It's an old something that I used to see on. It's always something, which kind of comes up. First something is that I've been very busy with work. I've received a huge amount of orders for cameras, much more than I usually get. This was something to me, this a Japan vintage camera store was kind of something as a sideline or something that I plan to make a little additional money with. But a lot of people are very interested in cameras, and recently it's been a lot of work to keep up with the orders I've received. So that's given me less time to make videos. And then next, it's the end of the school year, and I have kids in school who are moving up a grade. So there's a lot in this season to get ready for and prepare for summer school, summer camp, summer vacation, and then get ready for the school year to begin next August. So yeah, lots of this and lots of that. It's always something. Anyway, that's it for my video today. If you like the video, please click the like button. If you want to see more, please subscribe. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you tune in again soon.